I just got back from a wine-soaked overnighter in Toronto, and I'm so excited to share it, but I'm all alone. Oh well, might as well just curl up and read all about the new Canada Food Guide. Who's with me? Here on Flying for Flavor. Well, the original plan was to be sipping white port with my flavor crew, but they do have other lives besides hanging out with me. So completely understand last minute schedule conflicts. So hopefully we'll be all together again this coming weekend. If they're listening, it's Ice Wine Weekend. So make sure you get here. Okay, so I'm going to be a nice team player and I'm going to save that white port sampling for another time. I just put it back in my cellar, so someone's going to have to remind me. But I'm here, a little worse for wear, as I mentioned. I just sampled about 50 Bordeaux releases the other night at the Union de Grand Cru de Bordeaux event at the Royal Ontario Museum. If you were following on social media, you'll get some snapshots of the wines that I picked and those that I purchased, especially if you go to the blog section of stephaniepichet.ca. You'll be able to see which ones I chose of the releases to purchase for myself, which is usually a good indication of which ones I liked the best. I also gave you some links for the 2014 releases of those same few wines in case you want to kind of bone up on what's to come for this year. So I was originally thinking about taping a bonus episode about it for next week, but I really don't have a whole lot to talk about aside from what I put in the blog post. The show this year was a little smaller than usual, and although I liked many of the wines last night, there wasn't any one style or producer that warranted a long audio endorsement, if I can put it that way. A friend of mine even messaged me earlier today asking like what stood out this year. And honestly, the first thing I thought of was prices. I mean, I know that recent vintages were good, but some of were actually double the price of previous releases. So like I'm not going to start naming names for whatever reason, but I just like there was one wine that I thoroughly enjoyed. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before. And so I was ecstatic to see them come back again. I even went to say a quick hello to the producer at the table. And then now I was tasting some of the other releases and I thought, okay, it's still good this year, but is it spectacular like it was previously? I think some of her competitors are now starting to catch up a little bit, or maybe it's just this recent release is a little better. But her price was still almost double the amount. So I don't know if it has to do with the amount of production. I don't know if there was weather playing an issue, but a lot of the prices are really jumped up again this year. So I didn't buy as many as I normally would. Splurged on what I thought was worth it. Bought a few that were great value for the money. So you'll see the whole listing on that blog post I mentioned, and you'll be able to find that at stephaniepichet.ca/blog. Okay, now to why you're probably tuning in, and it is the new Canada Food Guide. So many people may not realize, but the Canada Food Guide is 75 years old or thereabouts. It's been kind of the basis of health and dietary training, not just on the industry or hospitality side, but for all areas where food touches people, meaning school lunches or breakfast programs, health classes in grade school. It's always kind of been around. And it really hasn't changed that much. I mean, the marketing of it may have changed. Serving sizes of certain food groups may have changed a touch, but essentially it's pretty much stayed the same. I mean, for all of you who remember back then, there was grains, fruits and vegetables, meat and alternatives was all grouped together, and then dairy was on the fourth. So I don't usually pay much attention to something like the food guide, but there's two reasons that this new one kind of caught my eye. It hasn't officially been released yet. I think that they've been dripping it out to the media to see and get a feedback from the public about what if these changes are going to be too radical. So it is a little bit different sorry, to say the least, compared to what it was prior. And I do believe that if these changes do get implemented, it's going to affect the next generations. They're going to be learning it in school. Government food programs are going to be following it every turn. So what's the beef? And that was completely pun intended. Sorry, bad joke. Wine's obviously still kicking in. Okay, so it's still in draft form at the moment. So here's a little bit of background. The new food guide is going to be a little bit more focused on the environment and how our dietary choices kind of affect the environment. So you're going to get a little bit more, less on the meat and dairy side, to say the least, mostly because it does affect the environment. There is some cultural elements in these decisions for changes. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that afterwards. And then, of course, there's a lot of alternative diets out there, specifically vegetarianism and veganism. Number two, some of the changes to this food guide are actually going to benefit farmers and food sovereignty. National Farmers Union sounds like they're pretty ecstatic about these upcoming changes, but I know a lot of other industries out there are not. And then thirdly, one of the big changes is that Health Canada, when they had these meetings about it, made a point of shutting the door to food lobbyists. Now, many of you may not realize that a lot of the marketing and choices that we've been making has been the result of that marketing. So I'm not going to go and start waving a ban. Well, I'll go into detail more about my own personal opinion later. But right now, everyone kind of knows, and these are just the basic facts, that there are lobbyists for the cattle industry, for chicken farmers, dairy farmers. Of course, there's different milk producers, egg farms. Each of these particular groups has their own association, and they have lobbyists whose only job is to make sure that the government is putting their particular product into the hands of consumers. Basically, they know how much the Canadian government's opinion on what you should be eating really does make a difference to everyone who lives here and will affect sales. So I hate to say it, sales really make a difference. And it does keep people employed, but it's just like any other industry. So we have to kind of take the romanticism about the food part out of it and think of these as businesses. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of links I will leave in the show notes. There's articles for the Globe and Mail. Huffington Post did a really great job of it. And if I can find the link before I upload this, there was another little bit more in-depth article from Maclean's Magazine about the dairy industry specifically, and it's based on some interviews and stuff that were held back in 2015. Just if people want to know more about one of the reasons that the dairy industry is going to be hit the hardest, actually. So the way these changes are going, there's been authors and journalists and everything who have been advocating towards creating a new dialogue about what we're consuming and why. Sometimes it's because someone has said so, whether it's a government or marketing agency. Sometimes it's a nutritionist, and we don't know if that nutritionist is also being paid. There's a lot of misleading information out there. Everyone jokes around about how, yes, sometimes every day there's something new you're not supposed to have and something new that is supposed to be good for you. So how are you supposed to know? And like with anything that I do in my life, I mean, food is something that I consume. So I personally take it upon myself to learn about what I'm consuming, make those decisions on my own, and not blame anyone else for it, or look to anyone else to basically give me the right answers. There are too many out there right now, and it's too easy to see results and skew them and change things towards your own benefit. So a couple of the notes that I read in some of these things, that there always are political and economic forces that are steering us towards one particular food or beverage over another. Dairy is getting hit the hardest right now, and it's unfortunately going to be kind of labeled the new milk war, where there's a lot of, and it's not just vegans. there's a lot of studies out there now saying that, dairy isn't as important to human health as most the dairy industry would love you to believe. And it partly has to do with other cultures. Dairy consumption is more prevalent in North American and Western diets. If you look in the Eastern cultures, there's a lot of other groups out there who are not consuming dairy or anything as much as everybody else. And a lot of times there's even things like lactose intolerance in certain ethnicities. They just have trouble digesting milk. So they've seemed to be doing well over these years, but less and less people are consuming it and realizing that, hey, my health is not suffering as much because I'm not doing it, or I'm not consuming dairy products. And there's still little things happening, not just in Canada, but also the United States. Like chocolate milk is still, served in schools, and it's actually encouraged to be consuming milk for children. And chocolate milk, and that's my own personal thing, chocolate milk is just milk with sugar. Milk that's already got some natural sugars in it, and you add more sugar. Anyone who tries to tell me that it's a healthy thing to drink, I will go toe to toe with you for answers. There's many better things out there. I would actually compare the caffeine and sugar component in chocolate milk to a Gatorade. I find that it's that much of a sugar bomb, and I don't think it really does the same thing for the body that people would like you to believe. So I'm even hurrying down. I guess Coca-Cola's tried doing some kind of a super milk thing called Fairlife. I was reading about financial incentives in the U.S. to get fast food chains to start featuring more milk and cheese, which will get people consuming it more often. And it said it's one of the reasons that even McDonald's started those specialty coffees. Sometimes those coffee drinks contain up to 80% milk. So as much as they're pushing all of these lattes and flavored drinks, the amount of dairy that's required to do this is kind of helping the dairy industry as well. Sometimes I
just got back from a wine-soaked overnighter in Toronto.
Things that kind of spurs. So yes,
and I'm so excited to share it, but I'm
now
all alone.
The word dairy is now spoken of sometimes.
Might as well just curl up and read all
in the
about
same
the
tone
new
as
Canada Food Guide.
Was.
Who's with me?
So it's
here
almost
on
like
Flying
there's
for Flavor.
A fashion trend now to be dairy-free and gluten-free. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but dairy is rumored to be eliminated as a food group in the new Canada Food Guide. They are going to lump
the original plan was to be sipping white port with my flavor crew.
But it is going to be focused more on
they do have other lives besides hanging out with me.
Looking for calcium and the other properties in dairy.
Last minute schedule conflicts.
Other sources.
So hopefully we'll be all together again this coming weekend. If they're listening,
things like
ice
salmon,
wine weekend. So make sure you get here.
Spinach.
Okay, so I'm going to be a nice team player, and I'm going to save that white port sampling for another time.
Absorbable,
I just put it back in my cellar, so someone's going to have to remind me.
Calcium, then
but
maybe
I'm
milk
here,
a
little worse for wear, as I mentioned. I just sampled about 50 Bordeaux releases
going forward for sure.
The other night at the Union de Grand Cru de Bordeaux event at the Royal Ontario Museum. If you're following on social media, you'll get some snapshots of the wines that I picked
these other
and
countries have
those
not
that I've been consuming
dairy.
Especially if you go to the blog section of StephaniePichet.ca, you'll be able to see which ones I chose of the releases to purchase for myself, which is usually a good indication of which ones I liked the best.
They're noticing that
I also give you some links for the 2014 releases of those same few wines,
so there's always a big push
in case you want to kind of bone up on what's to come for this year. So I was originally thinking about taping a bonus episode about it
to be opening
for next week, but I really don't have a whole lot to talk about right now.
There's actually,
aside from what I put in the blog post, the show this year was a little smaller than usual
in Thailand of all places.
And although I liked many of the wines last night, there
now going to be a way
wasn't
to make
any
you taller.
one style or producer that warranted
thing. I mean, I know there's a whole tie into bone health, but
audio endorsement, if I can put it that way.
A
friend of mine even messaged me earlier today asking what stood out this year. And honestly, the first thing I thought of was
health issues
prices.
and shorter stature.
I mean, I know that recent vintages were good. crazy thing on my part.
Some of
what does this mean?
we're actually double the price of previous releases.
Old Canada Food Guide.
I'm not going to start naming names for whatever reason, but I just
like
there was one wine.
I think that's one of the things that's going to affect things the most going forward.
Thoroughly enjoyed.
Because this is going to affect
I don't remember it was last year or the year before,
more
and so I was
than anyone.
Ecstatic to see them come back again. I even made a
the older generations
quick hello
be the
to
most
the producer at the table.
Change.
And then now I was tasting some of the other releases, and I thought, okay, it's still good this year.
Milk with
but is it spectacular like it was previously? I think some of her competitors are now starting to catch up a little bit.
Why their
or maybe it's just this recent release is a little better.
But her price was still
almost double the amount. So I don't know if it has to do with the amount of production. I don't know if there was weather playing an issue. But a lot of the prices are really jumped up again this year.
More beneficial health-wise.
I didn't buy as many as I normally would. So splurged on what I thought was worth it. Bought a few that were great value for the money. So you'll see the whole listing on that blog post I mentioned, and you'll be able to find that at stephaniepichet.ca/blog.
And then between the ages of 9 and 18, they were used to be suggesting 3 to 4 servings of milk and alternatives.
To why you're probably tuning in, and it is the new Canada Food Guide.
People became adults.
So
the serving
many people may not realize, but the Canada Food Guide is 75 years old,
or thereabouts. When you're a child, all the way up to 2 and 3 servings
kind of
as you got older.
Of
and as much as proteins
health and dietary training,
I think they're going to be more specific
not just
on what types of
on
protein
the industry or hospitality side, but
to be consuming.
For all areas where food touches people, meaning school lunches or breakfast programs.
The other thing that I noticed
health classes in grade school, it's always kind of been around.
Skim 1% or 2%
it
milk.
Really hasn't changed that much. I mean, the marketing may have changed. Serving sizes of certain food groups may have changed a touch, but essentially it's pretty much stayed the same. I mean, for all of you who remember back then, there was like grains,
they do suggest having lower
fruits
fat
and vegetables,
alternatives. Like it's going to be a big deal.
Meat and alternatives was all grouped together, and then dairy was on the fourth.
I think this is going to be about the time where I
I don't usually pay much attention to something like the food guide, but there's 2 reasons that this
I was going to do this with the
one kind of caught my eye. It hasn't officially been released yet. I think that they've been dripping it out
as a guide
to the media to see and get a feedback from the public about what if these changes are going to be too radical. So it is a little bit different.
Just turned 47.
Sorry to say the least,
over the last
compared to what it was
5
prior.
years or so.
And I do believe that if these changes do get implemented, it's going to affect the next generations. They're going to be learning that are not good for me. Government food programs are going to be following at every turn.
It's doing something wrong.
So what's the beef?
And
that was completely pun intended. Sorry, bad joke.
Then I used to be able
wine's
to.
obviously still kicking in.
Okay,
so
sitting, I feel awful.
It's still in draft form at the moment. So here's a little bit of background.
Things, as in too much dairy, too much meat. I also
the new
feel
food
very
guide
heavy.
is
so it's not
going
even
to be a little bit more focused on the environment.
I don't have the
and
same
how
energy level.
Our dietary choices kind of affect the environment.
So you're going to get.
I don't want to go into detail of that because nobody wants to hear any about that.
However,
less on the meat and dairy side, to say the least. Mostly because it does affect the environment.
I travel.
There is some cultural elements in these decisions for changes. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that afterwards. And then, of course, there's a lot of alternative diets out there, specifically vegetarianism and veganism.
We had wings.
Number 2,
we got home tonight.
Some of the changes to this food guide are actually going to benefit farmers. They were baked in the oven, sovereignty.
But I still had 6.
National Farmers Union sounds like they're pretty ecstatic about these upcoming changes. But I know a lot of other industries out there are not. And then thirdly, one of the big changes is that Health Canada, when they had these meetings about it, made a point of shutting the door to food lobbyists.
I do know that I am cooking
maybe you
more
may
at
not
home
realize
as opposed to
that
relying on eating out
a lot
when
of
I'm not
the
traveling.
marketing and choices that we've been making has been the result of that marketing. So I'm not going to go and start waving the ban. Well, I'll go into detail more about my own personal opinion later. But right now,
ability or opportunity to sample.
Everyone kind of knows, and these are just the basic facts, that there are lobbyists for the cattle industry, for chicken farmers, dairy farmers.
To get back and get serious, because if I'm not healthy,
of course, there's different milk producers,
to be traveling and doing all
egg
that stuff
farms,
will be cut back. So it just kind of makes sense to me.
Each of these particular groups has their own
so that I can
association,
have more fun
and they have lobbyists whose only job is to make sure that the government is putting their particular
product
wine sampling every single night. My body
into the hands
won't
of
let me do that
consumers
anymore.
Basically,
and
they
I've
know how much the
been
Canadian
a little bit more
government's
diligent
opinion
about,
on what you should be eating.
okay, unless I'm doing
really
a class or a
does make a
sampling
difference
or,
to everyone
who
I'm
lives here,
entertaining or have friends over,
and will
or I'm
affect
out someplace.
sales.
So I hate to
There's
say
no
it,
need for me
sales
to
really
be
make a difference.
opening up a couple bottles for sampling.
And it does
just
keep
gets to
people
be a little
employed, but
excessive.
it's just like
But those
any
are
other
my
industry.
choices.
So we
And
have to
that's
kind of
what I
take the
want to
romanticism about the food part out of it
remind
and think
is
of
that
these as
regardless of the new
businesses.
changes that get released in the
Okay,
New Canada
so there's
Food
going to be a
Guide,
lot of
regardless
links I will
of what
leave
your
in the
kids
show
are
notes.
learning at home.
There's articles
I'm assuming
for
that most of
the Globe and
you
Mail.
listening are,
Huffington Post did a
out of
really
standard
great job
school
of
age
it.
will be learning this.
And if I can
And then
find
as
the
much
link
as
before I upload this,
you,
there was another
we're going to hear
little bit more
conflicting
in-depth
things.
article from
Just
Maclean's
keep in
magazine
mind
about
that they're also businesses.
the dairy industry,
The dairy industry,
specifically,
the
and
beef
it's
industry,
based on some
chicken
interviews and
industry,
stuff that were held
etc.,
back in
are all gonna be
2015.
coming out
Just if
hard
people
on
want to
their
know
marketing
more about
campaigns,
one of the reasons that
just
the
prior
dairy
to
industry
when
is
the
going
new
to be
guide is
hit the
released.
hardest, actually.
And probably
So
for
the way
first
these
year or
changes
so
are going,
afterwards, they are going to try
been
to
authors
basically
and
downplay
journalists and everything
They
who
are
have
going
been
to
advocating towards
try to
creating a
overshadow
new dialogue
the
about what we're
new
consuming and why.
recommendations with what
Sometimes
their
it's because
experts
someone
say.
has said so,
But I'll keep it
whether
all
it's
in balance.
a government
And
or
I've always
marketing
kind of lived my life
agency.
with,
Sometimes it's a nutritionist,
you know your
and we
body
don't know if
best,
that nutritionist is
and
also
a
being
little bit of
paid.
everything is
There's a lot
not
of
going to
misleading
hurt.
information out there. Everyone jokes around about how
puts enjoyment in your
yes,
life. And of
sometimes
course, it adds flavor.
every day there's something new you're not supposed to have and something new that is supposed to be good for you. So how are you supposed to know? And like with anything that I do in my life, I mean, food is something that I consume.
Fly in my soup.
So
I wasn't going to
personally
originally,
take it upon myself
mostly because it's no
to
fun doing it by
learn
yourself. However,
about what I'm consuming. Make those decisions on
wanna
my
make
own and not
sure,
blame anyone else for
that
it,
I have
or look to anyone else to
some
basically give
listeners
me
behind me
the right
to kinda
answers.
stand up to
there are too many
the
out
food
there right
bullies
now,
out
and
there.
it's too easy to
there are many
see
people
results
who are on
and skew
those
them
keto
and
diets,
change
low-carb
things towards your own
diets,
benefit.
some other kind of diets.
So a couple of the notes
They
that I read in
promote
some of these
shakes and
things that there is
alternatives and
there always
supplements
are political and economic forces that are
just like the
steering us
industries who might
towards
be hurting and
one
affect
particular food or
the
beverage
choices
over another.
that you're making at the
dairy's
grocery
getting hit the
store.
hardest right now, and it's unfortunately
also
going to be
businesses as well.
kind of labeled
And
the
a lot
new
of times
milk war,
they are
where there's a
making
lot of, and it's not
claims
just
on
vegans.
specific ways of eating.
There's a lot of studies out
sometimes
there
it's for
now
weight
saying
loss,
that
sometimes it's
dairy
for,
isn't as important to
hormone therapy,
human
sometimes
health
they all
as
have their reasons,
most.
but why you need to eat the way that they're telling
The
you
dairy
to
industry
eat,
would love you to
especially
believe,
with all of
and
these,
it partly has to do with other
what do you call
cultures.
them?
Dairy
Delivery
consumption
services,
is
meal delivery
more
services that are out
prevalent
right now. We're gonna
in
do a
North
whole
American
episode
and
on those
Western
later on.
diets. If you look in the Eastern cultures,
If you
there's a lot
see-
of other
or if you're one of those people that think
groups
that
out there
your
who are
way of
not
eating
consuming
is the best way,
dairy or anything,
and it may have
as
helped you
as much as everybody
Don't
else. And a lot of
think
times there's
that
even
it's
things
going
like
to work the same for
lactose
everyone
intolerance
else.
in certain
Some
ethnicities. They just
people
have trouble
have-
digesting milk.
have
So
bodies that digest
they
things
seem to be
better
doing
than
well
others
over these years,
and it doesn't necessarily
but
mean
less and less
that
people
one
are
person's
consuming it
healthier
and
than the
realizing
other.
that, hey,
You
my
don't
health is
know,
not
so just
suffering
keep
as
an eye.
much because I'm
Basically,
not
it's called,
doing it,
will you mind
or
your
I'm
own
not
business?
consuming dairy products.
Keep
and there's
your own
but there's
food
still little
choices
things happening,
reasonable
not
to
just
yourself,
in
and just
Canada, but also
please
the United
don't
States. Like
tell
chocolate milk
everybody,
is still,
I don't like to be told that I shouldn't
served
be
in
ordering
schools,
pasta
and it's
when I'm
actually
out.
encouraged
It's
to be
my
consuming
choice.
milk
If I
for
want to
children
load
and
up
chocolate milk, and that's
on
my
that
own personal
spaghetti,
thing.
that is my
Chocolate milk
call.
is just
If I
milk
decide
with
I want to
sugar.
have just cheese
Milk
for
that's
dinner
already
one
got
night,
some natural
again,
sugars in
my
it,
call.
and you add more sugar.
I have also been known to have a steak and a bottle of
anyone
wine
who tries
for
to tell
dinner.
me that it's a healthy
Again,
thing to
my
drink,
call.
I will
don't
go
need
toe to
somebody
toe
else
with
to
you.
tell me what to put in my body. The
for
only one who's
answers.
going to have
There's
the
many
consequence
better things out there. I would
is
actually
me.
compare
All right,
enough of my rant.
Caffeine.
Okay,
And so hopefully that was a little
caffeine
bit
and
informative.
sugar
I am gonna
component
leave, of
in
course, in the
chocolate
show
milk
notes for
to a
you,
Gatorade.
some of those articles if you want to read
I find
more.
it's
but
that much of a
there's some conflicting
sugar bomb.
ideas out there,
and I don't think it really
about
does
what's to come.
the
But
same
again,
thing for
I
the
think
body that
Health Canada
people would like
is
you to
trying to
believe.
make sure that they're making
So
these
I'm even
changes that
hurrying
are
down
going
now.
to
I guess
be
Coca-Cola's tried doing
the best
some
choices
kind of a
of
super milk thing
recommendations
called
for
Fairlife.
everyone.
I was reading
Mostly
about
because it
financial
does not just
incentives
affect
in the
our
U.S.
health as Canadians,
to get
it, believe it or not, also
fast
affects our
food
healthcare
chains to start
system,
featuring
which is more milk and cheese, which will get people under consuming it more often. Least. And it's one of the reasons that even McDonald's started those specialty coffees.
Going to see a better
sometimes those coffee drinks contain up to 80% milk. So as much as they're pushing all of these lattes and flavored drinks, the amount of dairy that's required to do this is kind of helping the dairy industry as well. Sometimes there are, as I mentioned earlier, ice wine 101. Other things that kind of spurs. So yes, we had the whole gluten thing. Now this is the word dairy is now spoken of sometimes.
Pull out a few different
in the same tone as gluten
Niagara
was. So it's
Southern Ontario's
almost like
finest.
There's a fashion trend now to be dairy-free and gluten-free. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but dairy is rumored to be eliminated as a food group in the new Canada Food Guide.
What makes ice
they are
wine
going
stand
to
out
lump protein together in one of the food groups, but it is going to be focused more on plant-based protein
a little bit,
and looking for calcium and the other properties in dairy within other sources. So there are vegetables and things like that do have a lot of the same components. Things like salmon, some spinach. There are some things out there that if you eat enough of it, they actually provide more absorbable, if that's a word, nutrition and calcium than maybe milk actually will for your digestive system. So that's going to be an interesting note going forward for sure. There's a lot of other regions. I'm not going to go through and read all of this. Because these other countries have not been consuming dairy, that's been a big deal for the dairy industry, because as our world shrinks and we are looking to other cultures and people are traveling more, they're noticing that these other cultures are not consuming the same thing